"I didn't steal anything worth calling the police for," she said, her voice barely steady as security guards flanked her sides. The billionaire stared at the security footage again, his finger hovering over the pause button. "Then why did you take it? Why risk everything for a $2 ring?" She looked him straight in the eyes, something hotel maids were never supposed to do with the owner. "Because 15 years ago, you gave me one just like it before you promised you'd find me again." His glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor. Have you ever had that moment when someone from your past shows up in the absolute worst possible way? When the universe has such a twisted sense of humor that it makes you the villain in someone else's story without you even knowing it. Before we begin, my grandma made a bet with me that I wouldn't hit 1,000 subscribers on this channel. I love her so much, but I need y'all to help prove her wrong. So if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. It's free, it takes half a second, and honestly, it would make my whole week. Tell us where you're watching from, so we know you're here with us. Now, sit back and enjoy the story of a woman who lost everything because of a $2 ring, and the man who discovered she was the one who got away. The Thomas Grand Hotel ballroom sparkled like a diamond-encrusted dream. Crystal chandeliers cast honeyed light over Manhattan's elite, as they sipped champagne worth more than what most people made in a day. Women in designer gowns that cost more than a car payment floated between tuxedoed men who ran the world's biggest companies. It was the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala, where the wealthy came to feel good about writing tax-deductible checks. Mara Thorne moved through the crowd like a ghost. In her black and white uniform, she was invisible to the guests who handed her empty glasses without making eye contact. 3 years she'd worked at the Thomas Grand, and 3 years she'd served at this gala. Tonight was different though. Tonight was her last shift. She hadn't planned it that way. She needed this job more than ever with her mother's hospital bills piling up. But sometimes life doesn't give you choices. "More champagne for table 7, her supervisor barked, shoving a tray into her hands. Mara nodded and made her way across the ballroom floor. That's when she saw him. David Thomas himself, owner of the Thomas Hotel Group, standing near the stage in a tuxedo that probably cost more than her entire year's salary. He was taller in person than he looked in the photos that hung in the hotel lobby. His dark hair was perfectly styled, with just a touch of silver at the temples that made him look distinguished rather than old. He was laughing at something the woman beside him had said. Victoria Keller, the hotel manager. The woman who'd made Mara's life hell for 3 years with her impossible standards and thinly veiled contempt. Mara looked away quickly. People like her weren't supposed to stare at people like them. She delivered the champagne and continued her rounds, picking up discarded napkins and empty glasses. The night wore on, the wealthy got drunker, the donations got bigger. Just another Thursday at the Thomas Grand. Until Victoria Keller's voice cut through the pleasant hum of the ballroom like a knife. "Security! Stop that woman!" The room went quiet. 200 faces turned toward the commotion. Mara froze, a tray of empty glasses in her hands, as Victoria stormed across the ballroom floor, pointing directly at her. "That's her," Victoria said, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. "She's the one who's been stealing from the guests." Mara felt her stomach drop. "What? I haven't stolen anything." 2 security guards appeared at her sides, taking the tray from her hands. "Mrs. Whitmore reported her diamond bracelet missing from her suite this afternoon," Victoria announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And we've just discovered this woman taking items from the lost and found." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Mara felt her face burn as 200 pairs of eyes stared at her. "I didn't take any bracelet," she said, her voice shaking. "I swear." "We have you on camera," Victoria said coldly, taking a ring from the lost and found drawer. "That's hotel property." "It was just a cheap ring," Mara said, her voice barely audible. "It had been there for months. Nobody claimed it." "So you admit you took it?" Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. "The Thomas Group has a zero-tolerance policy for theft. You're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you out." The guards took her by the elbows. Mara felt her world collapsing around her. 3 years of perfect evaluations. 3 years of never being late, never calling in sick. 3 years of cleaning up after the wealthy without complaint. All gone because of a $2 ring. Wait! A deep voice cut through the murmuring crowd. David Thomas stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Let's not make a scene, Victoria. Take her to my office. I'll handle this personally. Victoria's smile faltered. But Mr. Thomas, the policy is mine to enforce, he finished for her. My office. Now. The security guards led Mara through the service corridor, away from the staring eyes of the gala guests. Her legs felt numb. Her mind raced with panic. She couldn't lose this job. Not now. Not with her mother's medical bills and the rent due next week. They took the service elevator to the top floor where the executive offices were located. Mara had cleaned these offices hundreds of times but had never been inside David Thomas's private suite. The guards deposited her in a waiting area and left, closing the door behind them. 5 minutes later, Victoria Keller entered, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. She didn't look at Mara. 10 minutes after that, David Thomas arrived. He'd removed his bow tie, and the top button of his shirt was undone. He nodded to Victoria, then turned to Mara. Miss Thorne, is it? Yes, sir. Mara kept her eyes on the floor. Come in, please. He opened the door to his office and gestured for her to enter. Victoria, give us a moment. Victoria's perfect eyebrows rose slightly. Sir, I really think I should be present for. That won't be necessary, he said firmly. Please return to the gala and make my apologies. Tell them I had an urgent matter to attend to. Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line, but she nodded and walked away. Mara followed David Thomas into his office. It was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. A large desk dominated one side of the room, but he led her to a sitting area with leather couches instead. Please sit. He gestured to one of the couches, then walked to a small bar in the corner. Would you like a drink? Water? Something stronger? Water, please, Mara said, her mouth suddenly dry. He poured 2 glasses of water and handed one to her, then sat on the couch opposite. Miss Thorne, I understand you've been accused of stealing a ring from the lost and found, as well as a guest's diamond bracelet. Is that correct? I took the ring, she admitted, her voice small. But I swear I never touched any bracelet. I would never steal from a guest. David Thomas studied her for a long moment. Why the ring? It had been in that drawer for months. Nobody claimed it. It's just a cheap costume piece. That doesn't answer my question. His voice wasn't unkind, but it was firm. Why that particular item? Mara looked down at her hands. It reminded me of something I used to have. Something important to me. David reached for a remote on the coffee table between them and pressed a button. A large screen on the wall lit up, showing security footage of the lost and found area. He fast-forwarded until Mara appeared on screen, opening the drawer, taking out the ring, slipping it onto her finger, then quickly removing it and putting it in her pocket. You looked at it for quite a while, he observed. It seemed to mean something to you. Mara didn't answer. David paused the footage and zoomed in on her face. How long have you worked for the Thomas Group, Miss Thorne? 3 years, sir. And in those 3 years, have you ever taken anything else that didn't belong to you? Never, she said firmly, looking up at him for the first time. I'm not a thief. Something flickered across his face when their eyes met. A slight narrowing, a moment of confusion, quickly masked. Miss Thorne, He stopped, studying her more carefully. Have we met before? The question caught her off guard. I've worked here for 3 years, sir. I've seen you at events. No, that's not it. He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving her face. You look familiar in a different way. Mara shifted uncomfortably. I just have one of those faces, I guess. David Thomas continued to stare at her, as if trying to place her in his memory. Then he shook his head slightly and returned his attention to the screen. About the bracelet, he said. Mrs. Whitmore is a regular guest. She claims her diamond tennis bracelet went missing from her suite this afternoon. You were assigned to clean her room, Correct. Yes, sir. But I didn't take anything. I swear on my mother's life. He nodded slowly. I believe you. Mara blinked in surprise. You do. Mrs. Whitmore has reported missing items before. They usually turn up after she's received compensation from either us or her insurance. He sighed. But the ring is a different matter. You admit you took it. Yes. Mara reached into her pocket and pulled out the small band with its fake blue stone. She placed it on the coffee table between them. I'm sorry. I know it was wrong. David picked up the ring, turning it over in his fingers. This is what all the fuss is about? It can't be worth more than a couple of dollars. It's not about the value, Mara said quietly. It's about what it represents. And what does it represent to you? Mara hesitated. How could she explain to this billionaire what a cheap ring meant to her? How could she make him understand that sometimes the most worthless things held the most value? It reminded me of someone I used to know, she said finally. Someone who gave me a ring like this once. A long time ago. David Thomas went very still. He looked at the ring again, then back at her face. Something changed in his expression. A dawning recognition, a disbelief. What was his name? He asked, his voice suddenly hoarse. This person who gave you a ring like this. Mara felt a chill run down her spine. Why does it matter? Please, he said, and there was an urgency in his voice that hadn't been there before. What was his name? Jack, she said slowly. His name was Jack. David Thomas set his water glass down carefully. And your name? Your full name? Mara Thorne. Before that, he pressed. What was your name before you were Mara Thorne? How did he know she'd changed her name? Mara felt her heart begin to race. Marianne, she whispered. Marianne Thornton. The glass in David's hand slipped, shattering on the marble floor. Neither of them moved to clean it up. Marianne, he repeated, the name sounding like a prayer on his lips. From Westlake Academy. Junior year English Lit. The world seemed to tilt beneath Mara's feet. How could he possibly know that? Unless... Jack? She breathed, hardly daring to believe it. Jack Thomas. He nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. Nobody's called me Jack in 15 years. Nobody's called me Marianne in just as long. They stared at each other across the coffee table. 15 years of separate lives stretching between them like an ocean. I didn't steal anything worth calling the police for, she said, her voice barely steady as security guards flanked her sides. The billionaire stared at the security footage again, his finger hovering over the pause button. Then why did you take it? Why risk everything for a $2 ring? She looked him straight in the eyes, something hotel maids were never supposed to do with the owner. Because 15 years ago, you gave me one just like it before you promised you'd find me again. His glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor. I looked for you, David said, his voice rough with emotion. When you disappeared senior year, I called your house. I went by every day for weeks. Nobody knew where you'd gone. My mother got sick, Mara said quietly. Cancer. We moved to be closer to a treatment center in Chicago. I had to drop out. Take care of her. You could have called. Left a message. Anything. With what phone, Jack? We lost the house. Lost everything. I was 17, working 2 jobs, sleeping on a cousin's couch, trying to keep my mother alive. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. I didn't exactly have time for high school romance. David flinched as if she'd slapped him. I'm sorry. I didn't know. How could you? You were on your way to Princeton. Full scholarship. Future secured. It wasn't like that, he started. But Mara cut him off. It doesn't matter now. It was a lifetime ago. She stood up, suddenly desperate to escape this office, this conversation, the weight of the past crashing down around her. Can I go now? Or are you still going to fire me for taking a $2 ring? David stood up too, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up in a way that made him look younger, more like the boy she remembered. Sit down, please, he said. But it wasn't an order. It was a request. Just Give me a minute to process this. Mara hesitated, then slowly sank back onto the couch. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan glittered like a jewelry box someone had tipped over, scattering gems across black velvet. 15 years, David said quietly, almost to himself. You've been working in my hotel for 3 of them, and I never knew. Would it have mattered if you did? Mara asked. He looked at her, really looked at her, in a way no one had in years. Not as a maid, not as an employee, but as a person with a history, with depth. Yes, he said simply. It would have mattered. A knock at the door interrupted them. Victoria Keller entered without waiting for a response, her perfect composure slightly frayed around the edges. Mr. Thomas, the mayor is asking for you, and Mrs. Whitmore is making quite a scene about her bracelet. David didn't take his eyes off Mara. Tell them I'll be down shortly, and Victoria, have security check the Wellington suite again, specifically behind the furniture. Mrs. Whitmore's jewelry has a habit of falling into hard-to-reach places. Victoria's lips thinned. Sir, with all due respect, this woman admitted to stealing hotel property. The policy is clear. The policy is mine, David said, his voice hardening, and I'm choosing not to enforce it in this instance. But that will be all, Victoria. The dismissal was unmistakable. Victoria's eyes darted between them, calculating, before she nodded stiffly and left, closing the door with just a touch more force than necessary. She doesn't like me, Mara observed. Victoria doesn't like anyone who might threaten her position, David replied. And right now you're an unknown variable. Mara laughed, a short, bitter sound. I'm a maid who stole a ring. Hardly a threat. You're the woman I spent years looking for, David corrected her. That makes you very much a threat in her eyes. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Mara didn't know how to respond. This whole situation felt surreal, like something from a movie, not her actual life. I should go, she said finally. You have guests waiting. Let them wait. David picked up the cheap ring from the coffee table, turning it over in his fingers. Tell me what happened after you left. Mara took a deep breath. She never talked about those years, never let herself think about them if she could help it. But something about sitting in this luxurious office, facing the boy who'd once meant everything to her, now a man who owned half of Manhattan, broke down her carefully constructed walls. My mother's cancer was already stage 4 when they found it, she began, her voice flat. We moved to Chicago because there was a clinical trial there. Our insurance wouldn't cover it, so we sold everything. The house, the car, even my mother's wedding ring. It still wasn't enough. David listened without interrupting, his eyes never leaving her face. I dropped out of school, got 2 jobs, mornings at a diner, nights cleaning office buildings. We lived in a 1-room apartment where the heat worked maybe half the time. For 8 months, I watched my mother disappear inch by inch. She paused, swallowing hard against the lump in her throat. She died anyway, left me with nothing but medical debt and a high school education I never finished. I couldn't even afford a proper funeral. I'm sorry, David said quietly. Don't be. It was a long time ago. What did you do after? Mara shrugged. Survived. Changed my name because the debt collectors were relentless. Worked whatever jobs I could find. Moved around a lot. Ended up in New York 5 years ago. Got hired at the Thomas Grand 3 years back. Been cleaning rooms ever since. And the ring. David held up the cheap band. The one I gave you? Mara's hand went to her throat, pulling out a thin chain that had been hidden beneath her uniform. On it hung a ring identical to the one David held, only older, more worn. I kept it, she said simply. It was the only thing I had left from before everything fell apart. David stared at the ring hanging from the chain, then back at the one in his hand. And when you saw this one in the lost and found, it was stupid, Mara admitted. A moment of weakness. It looked so much like mine. I thought maybe having a spare would be good, in case this one ever broke or got lost. She laughed softly. Pretty pathetic reason to get fired, huh? You're not fired, David said firmly. Victoria seemed pretty clear on that point. Victoria doesn't make those decisions. I do. He set the ring down and leaned forward. Marianne. Mara, she corrected him. I haven't been Marianne in a long time. Mara, he amended. I don't know what to say. Finding you like this, after all these years, it feels like fate. Fate. Mara raised an eyebrow. Fate would have been finding me before my mother died, before I had to drop out, before I spent 15 years scraping by, cleaning up after people who don't even see me. She shook her head. This isn't fate, Jack. This is just life being its usual messy self. David, he said. Nobody calls me Jack anymore either. A silence fell between them, filled with the ghosts of who they used to be and the strangers they'd become. The bracelet, Mara said suddenly. I really didn't take it. I know. David's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then showed her the screen. A text from security. Bracelet found behind dresser in Wellington Suite. Relief washed over Mara. So I'm not going to be arrested? No one was going to arrest you, David assured her. Even if the bracelet hadn't been found. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who would have had a theft on their record. Fair point. He studied her for a moment. What do you want, Mara? The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? I mean, what do you want? From life? From your career? From? He hesitated. From this situation. Mara laughed, but there was no humor in it. What I want doesn't matter much. What I need is my job. I have bills to pay. Your job is secure, David said. But that's not what I asked. What I want. Mara repeated, the question foreign on her tongue. When was the last time anyone had asked her that? When was the last time she'd even allowed herself to think about wants instead of needs? I want to not be invisible anymore. I want to wake up and not dread the day ahead. I want to use my brain instead of just my hands. She stopped, surprised by her own honesty. I can help with that, David said. Mara's eyes narrowed. I don't want your charity. It's not charity to recognize potential, he countered. You were the smartest person in our class, Marianne. You tutored me in English when I was failing. You wrote essays that made Mrs. Patel cry. What happened to that girl? She grew up, Mara said flatly. She learned that being smart doesn't pay the bills when you don't have a diploma or a degree. David nodded slowly. What if you could get those things now? At 32? With no money and a full-time job I can't afford to lose? Not likely. The Thomas Group has an education program for employees, David said. Tuition reimbursement. Flexible scheduling for classes. It's not widely advertised, but it exists. Mara stared at him. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve a second chance. He held her gaze. And because I've spent 15 years wondering what happened to the girl who gave me mine. Before Mara could respond, there was another knock at the door. This time a security guard entered. Sir, we found the bracelet just like you said. Behind the dresser in the Wellington Suite. Thank you, Jim, David said. Please inform Mrs. Whitmore and Miss Keller. The guard nodded and left. David turned back to Mara. So that's settled, he said. No theft. No firing. Just a maid who took a worthless ring from lost and found, Mara added. A ring that's now yours, David said, picking it up and holding it out to her. Consider it a gift. Mara hesitated, then took it. Thank you. Now about your future. Mr. Thomas, Mara interrupted. I appreciate what you're trying to do, really, but this is a lot. Finding out who you are, who I used to be to you. I need time to process this. David nodded. Of course. Take all the time you need. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, writing something on the back before handing it to her. My personal number. When you're ready to talk about that education program, or anything else, call me. Mara took the card, tucking it into her pocket alongside the ring. I should get back to work. Actually, why don't you take the rest of the night off? With pay. He added when he saw her start to protest. It's been an eventful evening. I can't just leave in the middle of a shift. You can if the owner says so. David smiled, and for a moment, Mara caught a glimpse of the boy she'd known. Earnest, a little awkward, with a smile that lit up his whole face. Please, Mara, go home. Rest. Think about what I said. Mara stood, smoothing down her uniform. All right. Thank you. David walked her to the door. One more thing, he said as she was about to leave. Why did you keep it? The ring. All these years. Mara looked down at the chain around her neck, at the worn blue stone that had traveled with her through homelessness, grief, and survival. Because it was the last good thing that happened to me, she said simply. Before everything else. She left without looking back, taking the service elevator down to the staff locker room. As she changed out of her uniform, her fingers brushed against the business card in her pocket. David Thomas, CO. And on the back, a phone number written in a handwriting she still recognized after 15 years. The night air was cool on her face as she stepped out of the service entrance. Above her, the Thomas Grand Hotel rose into the sky, its windows glowing with wealth and privilege. Somewhere up there, a charity gala continued without her. Somewhere up there, a boy she once knew was now a man with the power to change her life. Mara pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders and began the long walk to the subway. She had a lot to think about. The apartment was dark when Mara got home, the only light coming from the street lamp outside her window. She didn't bother turning on the lights. The electricity bill was already higher than she could comfortably afford. She sat at her small kitchen table, the hospital bill still where she'd left it. Final notice, $60,000. An impossible sum. Mara pulled out the business card and the ring, setting them both on the table next to the bill. 3 objects that represented her past, present, and possible future. The ring from the past, a reminder of who she'd been before life had beaten her down. The bill, her crushing present reality. The card with David's number, a door to a future she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. She picked up her phone, staring at the dark screen. It would be so easy to call him, to accept his help, to let him sweep in and fix everything with his billions and his guilt and his memories of who she used to be. But that wasn't who she was anymore. Marion might have accepted his help, might have been swept off her feet by the fairy tale of it all. But Mara had spent 15 years learning that nothing came without a price. Nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. She set the phone down without dialing. Tomorrow she would go back to the Thomas Grand. She would clean rooms and change sheets and remain invisible to the guests who passed through. But she would also inquire about the education program. Not because David had suggested it, but because it was what she wanted for herself. And maybe, just maybe, she would call that number. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday when she was ready, when she could face him not as the girl he remembered or the maid he employed, but as the woman she was becoming. Mara slipped the ring onto her finger, next to the one she wore on the chain. 2 identical rings, separated by 15 years of life. She held up her hand, watching the cheap blue stones catch what little light filtered through her window. Some things, it seemed, came full circle if you waited long enough. The next morning, Mara woke before her alarm. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying the encounter with David over and over. She dressed quickly in her uniform, the familiar routine grounding her after the surreal events of the night before. The subway was crowded as usual, bodies pressed together in uncomfortable intimacy. Mara stood holding the overhead rail, watching the tunnel lights flash by through the windows. Would today be different? Would people look at her differently now that the owner of the hotel knew who she was? Or would everything go back to normal, as if last night had never happened? She arrived at the staff entrance 15 minutes early, as she always did. The security guard nodded to her as she swiped her badge. "Morning, Mara." "Morning, Eddie." Nothing different there. She made her way to the locker room, changed into her freshly pressed uniform, and pinned her name tag to her chest. Mara Thorne, not Marion Thornton. That girl was gone. The morning briefing was held in a small room off the main kitchen. Mara slipped in quietly, taking her usual spot against the back wall. Her supervisor, Mrs. Patel, was already going through the day's assignments. Wellington Suite needs a deep clean after last night's bracelet drama, Mrs. Patel was saying. Mara, you'll handle that. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the room. So they knew. Of course they knew. Nothing stayed secret for long in a hotel. Actually, a voice said from the doorway, Mara won't be on cleaning duty today. Victoria Keller stood there, her expression as cold and perfect as ever. The room went silent. Ms. Keller, Mrs. Patel said, clearly surprised. Is there a problem? No problem, Victoria said smoothly. Mr. Thomas has requested that Mara assist with some special projects today. She'll be working directly with me. More whispers. More stares. Mara felt her face grow hot. I see, Mrs. Patel said, though clearly she didn't. Mara, you're excused then. Mara followed Victoria out of the room, conscious of the eyes following her. Victoria walked briskly down the hallway, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Mr. Thomas informed me this morning that you're to be given access to our employee education program, Victoria said without looking back. He also suggested you might be better utilized in a different capacity than housekeeping. He did. Mara hurried to keep up. Yes. Victoria stopped abruptly, turning to face her. I don't know what happened between you and Mr. Thomas last night, and frankly, I don't care. But let me be clear. This hotel runs on merit and hard work, not personal connections. I understand that, Mara said. Do you? Victoria's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. Because from where I stand, it looks like you've managed to leverage a personal relationship with the owner into special treatment. That's not what happened, isn't it? Victoria studied her with cold eyes. You were caught stealing, Mara. By any normal standard, you should have been fired and possibly prosecuted. Instead, you spent an hour alone with Mr. Thomas, and now you're being fast-tracked for advancement. What am I supposed to think? Mara met her gaze steadily. You're supposed to think that Mr. Thomas recognized potential in someone who's worked hard for this company for 3 years without a single complaint or absence. Victoria's lips twitched, almost a smile but not quite. Well rehearsed. Follow me. She led Mara to the executive floor, to a small office near the conference rooms. It was basic but clean, with a desk, computer, and window overlooking a brick wall. This will be your workspace for now, Victoria said. You'll be assisting the events team with coordination and guest relations for the upcoming conference season. It's entry-level but a step up from housekeeping. Mara looked around the office, trying to hide her surprise. Thank you. Don't thank me, Victoria said sharply. This wasn't my idea. Your first task is to review these guest profiles. She placed a stack of folders on the desk. The International Banking Conference starts next week. I need detailed notes on each VIP's preferences and requirements. I can do that, Mara said, sitting down at the desk. I should hope so. It's hardly rocket science. Victoria turned to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing, Mara. Whatever history you have with Mr. Thomas, I suggest you keep it professional from now on. Office romances never end well, especially when there's such a significant power imbalance. Before Mara could protest that there was no romance, Victoria was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of expensive perfume and the sting of her implication. Mara looked at the stack of folders, then at the computer, then at the office door with her name already printed on a temporary placard. How had her life changed so dramatically in less than 24 hours? She pulled out her phone and the business card David had given her. She should thank him at least. Let him know she appreciated the opportunity, even if she was determined to earn it on her own merits. She typed out a text. Thank you for the new position. I'll make the most of it. His response came almost immediately. You earned it. How's the office? Small but mine. Victoria made it clear she thinks I slept my way into it. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, I'll speak with her. Please don't. That will only make it worse. I can handle Victoria. Another pause. Dinner tonight? To discuss the education program. Mara stared at the message. Was it really just about the education program? Or was it something more? And did she want it to be something more? Just dinner, came another text. As old friends catching up. Nothing more. Mara took a deep breath and typed, okay, but somewhere normal. Not fancy. I know just the place. 7 p.m.? I'll send a car. I can take the subway. Humor me. After 15 years, I think I've earned the right to send a car. Mara smiled despite herself. Fine. 7 p.m. She put her phone away and turned to the stack of folders. Whatever happened tonight, whatever this new chapter of her life held, she was determined to prove Victoria wrong. She hadn't slept her way into this office, and she wouldn't coast on her connection to David. She would earn every opportunity through hard work and merit, just as she always had. By 6 o'clock, Mara had reviewed all the VIP profiles, made detailed notes on each guest's preferences, and even created a spreadsheet organizing them by arrival date and specific requirements. Her eyes burned from staring at the screen all day, but she felt a satisfaction she hadn't experienced in years. This was work that used her brain, not just her hands. She saved her files, shut down the computer, and headed to the staff locker room to change. She'd brought a change of clothes, nothing fancy, just jeans and a simple blue blouse she'd found at a thrift store last year. It was the nicest thing she owned, which wasn't saying much. As she was leaving through the staff exit, she nearly collided with Mrs. Patel. Mara, I've been looking for you, the older woman said. Is it true? You've been promoted. Sort of, Mara said, uncomfortable with the attention. It's a trial position with the events team. Mrs. Patel beamed. I always knew you were meant for better things. Too smart to be cleaning rooms forever. She patted Mara's arm. Don't forget us little people when you're running the place. Mara laughed. That's not going to happen. But thank you, Mrs. Patel. You deserve it, Beta. Now go. Don't be late for your dinner. Mara froze. How did you? Mrs. Patel winked. Hotels have no secrets, only delayed revelations. The car waiting outside with the Thomas Group logo isn't exactly subtle. Mara felt her face flush. It's just a business dinner. Of course it is, Mrs. Patel said, not believing it for a second. Enjoy your business dinner with the handsome billionaire. Outside, a sleek black car idled by the curb. The driver stepped out when he saw her, opening the rear door. Miss Thorne? I'm Michael. Mr. Thomas sent me to pick you up. Thank you, Mara said, sliding into the back seat. The leather was butter soft, the interior smelling of new car and subtle cologne. This was how the other half lived, no, the other 1%. A world she'd glimpsed only through the rooms she cleaned. The car pulled away from the curb, merging into Manhattan traffic. Mara expected them to head toward Midtown or the Upper East Side, where the expensive restaurants were. Instead, they crossed the bridge into Brooklyn. 20 minutes later, they pulled up in front of a small Italian restaurant on a quiet street. Nothing fancy, just a neighborhood place with checkered tablecloths visible through the windows and a neon sign that had seen better days. David was waiting outside, leaning against the brick wall. He'd changed out of his business suit into jeans and a simple button-down shirt. Without the trappings of wealth, he looked almost like the boy she remembered, except for the confidence in his stance and the threads of silver in his hair. He straightened when he saw the car, a smile spreading across his face as Michael opened the door for Mara. You came, he said, as if he'd half expected her to cancel. I said I would. Mara stepped onto the sidewalk, suddenly self-conscious in her thrift store clothes. You look nice, David said, and the simple sincerity in his voice made her believe him. Thanks. So do you. Very normal. He laughed. I do own clothes that aren't suits, believe it or not. He gestured to the restaurant. I hope this is okay. You said not fancy. It's perfect, Mara said, meaning it. How did you find this place? I used to come here when I first moved to New York, David explained as he held the door open for her. Before the Thomas Group took off. Best lasagna in the city. And the owner never tried to upsell me or kiss up when things started going well. Inside, the restaurant was warm and inviting. Red and white checkered tablecloths, candles and wine bottles, the rich smell of garlic and tomato sauce. The owner, an older Italian man with a magnificent mustache, greeted David like an old friend. "David, it's been too long." He embraced David, then turned to Mara with a warm smile. "And who is this beautiful lady?" "Tony, this is Mara, an old friend from high school." "Ah, high school sweetheart, yes?" Tony winked at Mara. "Just friends," Mara corrected quickly. "For now," Tony said with another wink. "Come, I have your usual table." He led them to a booth in the back corner, private but not isolated. A candle flickered between them as they sat down, casting warm light across the table. "Your usual wine, David?" Tony asked. "Please, if that's okay with you." David looked at Mara. "I don't know much about wine," she admitted. "Trust me," Tony said. "David may be rich now, but his taste is still good." After Tony left, a comfortable silence fell between them. Mara looked around the restaurant, taking in the family photos on the walls, the mismatched chairs, the genuine warmth of the place. "Thank you," she said finally, "for today. The job, I mean." "You don't need to thank me," David said. "I should be thanking you for not immediately reporting me to HR for abuse of power." Mara smiled. "Is that what it was?" "Probably. Victoria certainly thinks so." Victoria made her opinion very clear. David winced. "I'm sorry about that. She's excellent at her job, but sometimes she forgets that there's more to people than their position in the company hierarchy." "She's protective of you," Mara observed, "and suspicious of me." "She's protective of the company," David corrected, "and suspicious of anyone who might disrupt the status quo." Tony returned with a bottle of red wine, pouring 2 glasses before leaving them with menus. David didn't open his. "The lasagna," he said. "Trust me." "That confident in your recommendation?" "Some things you just know." He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then looked away. "So, the education program. Are you interested?" "I am," Mara said, "but I need to understand what it involves. I can't afford to cut my hours, and online classes are expensive even with tuition assistance." "The program is flexible," David explained. "You can take classes online or in person, and we adjust your schedule to accommodate them. The company covers 100% of tuition and books for approved programs." "And what counts as approved?" "Anything that could benefit your career with the Thomas Group. Business administration, hospitality management, marketing, finance." He paused. "Or English literature if that's still your passion." Mara looked down at her wine glass. "I haven't read a novel in years." "That doesn't mean you can't start again." She took a sip of wine, letting the rich flavor roll over her tongue. "Why are you doing this, David?" "Really?" He considered the question, taking his time to answer. "When I was 17, I was failing English. My scholarship was on the line. My future, everything I'd worked for. And this brilliant girl I barely knew stayed after school every day for 3 weeks to help me understand Dickens." "Great Expectations," Mara remembered. "You kept mixing up the characters." "I hated that book," David admitted with a laugh. "But you made me see it differently. You showed me how Pip's journey was about more than just becoming a gentleman. It was about recognizing true worth isn't about social status or money." "Ironic, coming from a billionaire. Maybe. Or maybe that's exactly why I remember it so clearly." He leaned forward. "You changed my life, Marianne. You helped me keep my scholarship, get into Princeton, build everything I have now. And then you disappeared, and I never got to thank you. Never got to return the favor." "So this is about paying a debt?" Mara asked, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. "No," David said firmly. "This is about recognizing potential and providing opportunity, the same way someone did for me once." He reached across the table, his fingers stopping just short of touching hers. "The fact that it's you, that's just the universe having a sense of humor." Tony arrived with their lasagna, the cheese still bubbling on top. The rich aroma of tomato sauce and herbs filled the air between them. "Eat, eat," Tony encouraged. "Talk later. Food gets cold, Words stay warm. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. The lasagna was indeed the best Mara had ever tasted. Layers of pasta, cheese, and sauce melting together in perfect harmony. "You were right," she said after a few bites. "This is amazing." David smiled, pleased. "Tony hasn't changed his recipe in 30 years. Says he got it perfect the first time. Smart man. He is. Taught me a lot about business, actually. About treating people right, valuing loyalty over quick profits." Mara took another bite, savoring it. When was the last time she'd eaten in a restaurant? Not a fast food place between shifts, but a real restaurant with tablecloths and candles? "Tell me about your life," she said. "How you went from scholarship kid to hotel magnate." David laughed. "That's a long story. We've got time." So he told her. About Princeton, where he'd studied business and worked 3 jobs to cover expenses the scholarship didn't. About the small real estate company he'd started with a loan from his uncle. About the first rundown hotel he'd bought and renovated, turning it from a fleabag motel into a boutique destination. About the risks he'd taken, the failures he'd endured, the lessons he'd learned. "The Thomas Group now owns 37 properties worldwide," he finished. "Hotels, resorts, residential developments." "Impressive," Mara said, meaning it. "You've worked hard." "I have, but I've also been lucky. Had opportunities others didn't. Like a scholarship to Westlake." "Exactly." David refilled their wine glasses. "Now it's your turn. Tell me about your life. The real version, not the condensed one from last night." Mara hesitated. Her story wasn't one of triumph and success. It was survival, pure and simple. "There's not much to tell," she said. "After my mother died, I bounced around for a while. Stayed with relatives until I wore out my welcome. Worked whatever jobs I could find. Waitress, retail, cleaning. Changed my name to escape the medical debt collectors. Got my GED when I was 23, Mara continued. Took night classes at the community center while working double shifts at a diner. Thought about community college, but there was never enough money or time. David listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face. I moved to New York because a friend said there were better opportunities here. Ended up sharing an apartment with 3 other women in Queens. Worked at a hotel in Times Square until they downsized. Applied at the Thomas Grand because the pay was better. That was 3 years ago. She shrugged. Not exactly a rags to riches story. It's a story of resilience, David said quietly. Most people would have broken under that kind of pressure. You don't break when there's no other option, Mara said simply. You just keep going. And your mother's medical debt? Is that still an issue? Mara tensed. She didn't want his charity, didn't want to be a problem for him to solve with his billions. It's my concern, not yours. David held up his hands. I'm not offering to pay it. I respect you too much for that. I'm just trying to understand what you're dealing with. Mara relaxed slightly. It's still there. $60,000. I've been paying it off little by little, but the interest keeps building. Some months I have to choose between that payment and rent. That's why you couldn't afford to lose your job. Yes. David nodded, understanding. The position with the events team comes with a significant raise. Will that help? It will, Mara admitted. If I can keep it. Why wouldn't you? Victoria made it pretty clear she thinks I don't deserve it. Victoria doesn't make those decisions, David said firmly. And from what I heard, you already impressed the events director with your work today. Mara looked up in surprise. You checked up on me? I asked how your first day went, David corrected. Apparently you reorganized their entire VIP system in one afternoon. It wasn't that impressive. Just basic spreadsheet work. To you, maybe. To them, it was a revelation. He smiled. You've always been able to see patterns others miss. I remember how you broke down great expectations into character maps for me. Changed the way I understood the whole book. You remember that? I remember everything about those 3 weeks, David said softly. How you'd twist your hair around your finger when you were thinking. How you'd get excited about symbolism and themes. How you gave me your copy of the book with all your notes in the margins. I can't believe you remember all that. I kept the book, he admitted. It's in my office at home. Your notes saved my scholarship, my future. Of course I kept it. Mara didn't know what to say. The idea that she had mattered that much to someone, that something she'd done 15 years ago had made such a difference, was overwhelming. I've embarrassed you, David said, noticing her discomfort. I'm sorry. No, it's not that. It's just. Mara struggled to find the words. For 15 years, I've been focused on survival, on getting through each day. I never thought about the impact I might have had on someone else's life. You had an impact, David assured her. A profound one. Tony appeared at their table, clearing away the empty plates. Dessert? The tiramisu is magnificent tonight. What do you think? David asked Mara. Worth staying for dessert? The question seemed to carry more weight than just tiramisu. Worth staying for more conversation, more revelations, more of whatever was happening between them. Yes, Mara said. Definitely worth staying for. Tony beamed. 2 tiramisu and espresso. Perfect. After he left, David leaned back in his chair, studying her. Can I ask you something personal? You can ask, Mara said cautiously. The ring. My ring. Why did you keep it all these years? Mara's hand went to her throat, where the chain with the original ring still hung. I told you last night. It was the last good thing that happened before everything fell apart. There's more to it than that, David pressed gently. You could have sold it. It's not valuable. But when you're desperate, even a few dollars matters. Mara was quiet for a long moment, considering how much to reveal. It reminded me of who I used to be, she said finally. Of the girl who had dreams and plans and thought she could control her own destiny. When everything else was taken from me. My home, my education, my mother. That ring was the one thing I chose to keep. And the one from the lost and found? Why take that risk for a duplicate? Because I was afraid of losing the original, Mara admitted. It's all I have left of before. If something happened to it, I'd lose that last connection to who I was. Who you still are, David corrected. That girl isn't gone, Mara. She's sitting right here. Mara shook her head. I'm not her anymore. I can't be. Why not? Because she believed in possibilities. In futures that could be shaped by will and hard work. I know better now. Life happens to you, not for you. I don't believe that, David said. And I don't think you do either. Not really. What makes you so sure? Because you kept the ring. Because you took the risk for a second one. Because even after everything, you still want more than just survival. He leaned forward. The girl who helped me understand Pip's journey is still in there. Still seeing patterns. Still believing in transformation. Tony returned with their dessert and espresso. The tiramisu was perfect. Layers of coffee-soaked ladyfingers, mascarpone cream, and cocoa powder. Mara took a bite and closed her eyes, savoring the rich flavors. Good, David asked, smiling at her expression. Amazing, Mara admitted. I can't remember the last time I had dessert in a restaurant. Life's too short to skip dessert, David said. My mother always said that. Is she still alive? Your mother, David nodded. Lives in South Carolina. Retired teacher. Still calls me every Sunday to make sure I'm eating properly and not working too hard. That's nice, Mara said, a touch of wistfulness in her voice. To have someone who worries about you. It is, David agreed. I'm lucky that way. He hesitated. What about you? Any family left? A cousin in Chicago. We exchange Christmas cards. That's about it. Friends. A few. Mostly work acquaintances. Mara shrugged. When you're working 2 jobs and barely making rent, there's not much time for socializing. That's going to change, David said confidently. With the new position, the education program, you'll have more time, more resources. Maybe, Mara said, not quite ready to believe it. If it all works out. It will. David's certainty was almost contagious. The foundation I mentioned, the one that provides scholarships like the one I received, is always looking for people who understand what it's like to face barriers to education. People who've lived it, not just studied it. Are you offering me another job? Mara asked, raising an eyebrow. No, just planting a seed. David smiled. Something to think about for the future. After you've completed your education. You're very confident I'll go through with it. I am. Because I remember how much you loved learning. How your eyes would light up when you talked about books and ideas. He paused. That doesn't just disappear, Mara. It might get buried under survival and struggle, but it's still there. The espresso was strong and bitter, a perfect counterpoint to the sweet tiramisu. Mara sipped it slowly, considering his words. What if you're wrong? She asked finally. What if I can't do it? Go back to school, what if I'm too old, too out of practice? Then you'll have tried, David said simply, and I'll still respect you for taking the risk. And if I fail, if I can't handle the workload or the pressure, then we'll figure out a different path. Together. The word hung between them. Together. Such a simple word, but loaded with implication. As friends, Mara clarified. As friends, David agreed. Or whatever we decide to be to each other. Mara set down her espresso cup. David, You don't have to decide anything now, he interrupted gently. About school, about us, about any of it. Just know that the opportunities are there when you're ready. Tony appeared with the check. David took it before Mara could even think to reach for it. My invitation, my treat, he said firmly. Thank you, Mara said. For dinner. For everything. Outside, the night had grown cooler. Stars were visible above. A rarity in the city with its constant light pollution. David's car was waiting at the curb, Michael standing beside it. Can I drive you home? David asked. Mara hesitated. I should take the subway. It's not far. It's late, David pointed out. And the subway isn't always safe at this hour. I've been taking the subway at night for years, Mara reminded him. I know how to handle myself. I know you do. David smiled. But humor me? Just this once. Mara relented. All right, just this once. The car was as luxurious as before, the leather seats soft and enveloping. Mara gave Michael her address, trying not to feel embarrassed about the neighborhood she lived in. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the city passing by outside the tinted windows. Finally, David spoke. I'd like to see you again, he said. Not as your boss. Not to discuss the education program. Just as us. Mara looked at him, at the earnestness in his eyes, the slight uncertainty in his expression. For all his wealth and power, in this moment he was just a man asking a woman if she wanted to see him again. I'd like that, she said softly. But we need to be careful. People at the hotel are already talking. Let them talk, David said. We're adults. We can make our own choices. Easy for you to say. You're the boss. I'm the maid who just got promoted. Former maid, David corrected. Current events coordinator. You know what I mean. I do. He sighed. We'll be discreet. Take things slow. See where it leads. The car pulled up in front of Mara's apartment building. It wasn't the worst in the neighborhood, but it was far from luxury housing. The security door was missing its lock, and graffiti decorated one side of the entrance. This is me, Mara said, suddenly self-conscious. I'll walk you up, David offered. That's not necessary. I'd like to, if that's okay. Mara nodded. David instructed Michael to wait, then followed her into the building. The elevator was out of order, as it had been for months. They took the stairs to the 4th floor, Mara leading the way. Her apartment was at the end of the hallway. She unlocked the 3 deadbolts, a necessity in this neighborhood, and pushed the door open. Would you like to come in? She offered, though part of her hoped he'd decline. Her apartment was clean but sparse, the furniture all secondhand, the decorations non-existent. Another time, David said, sensing her discomfort. It's late, and you have work tomorrow. So do you. True. He smiled. Thank you for tonight, for giving me a chance to explain, to reconnect. Thank you for dinner, Mara said, and for not making me feel like a charity case. You could never be that, David assured her. Not to me. There was a moment of awkwardness, neither sure how to end the evening. A handshake seemed too formal, a hug too intimate, a kiss unthinkable. Finally, David reached out and gently touched the chain around her neck, his fingers brushing against the ring that hung there. Good night, Marianne, he said softly, using her old name one last time. Good night, Jack, she replied, allowing herself the same indulgence. He turned and walked back toward the stairs. Mara watched until he disappeared from view, then entered her apartment and closed the door behind her. Inside, she leaned against the door, her mind racing with everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. From nearly being arrested to dining with a billionaire. From cleaning hotel rooms to having an office of her own. From Mara, the invisible maid, to Marianne, the girl who had made a difference. She pulled out the 2 rings, the original on its chain, the duplicate from her pocket. Identical in appearance, separated by 15 years of life and experience. She slipped the new one onto her finger, holding it up next to the old one. Some things came full circle, it seemed. Some losses found their way back to you, transformed by time and circumstance. Mara placed both rings on her bedside table and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would be a new day, the first of whatever this new chapter of her life would bring. She wasn't naive enough to think it would all be smooth sailing from here. Victoria's suspicion, the gossip at the hotel, the challenges of returning to education after so long. None of it would be easy. But for the first time in 15 years, Mara went to sleep not just hoping to survive the next day, but looking forward to it. The next morning, Mara arrived at work to find a small package on her desk. No note, no card, just a simple box wrapped in plain brown paper. She opened it carefully. Inside was a copy of Great Expectations. Not a new one, but a well-worn paperback with dog-eared pages and a cracked spine. She opened it to find the margins filled with neat, precise handwriting she recognized immediately as her own. Notes about symbolism, character development, thematic elements, all in the handwriting of her 17-year-old self. And there, on the inside cover, an inscription she'd forgotten writing. To Jack. Sometimes the greatest expectations are the ones we don't even know we have. Thanks for letting me help. Marianne. Beneath it, in a different hand, freshly written. To Mara. Sometimes the greatest expectations are the ones life surprises us with after we've stopped expecting anything at all. Thanks for coming back into my life. David. Mara traced the words with her fingertip, a smile spreading across her face. She placed the book carefully in her desk drawer and turned to her computer. She had work to do, a future to build, and for the first time in 15 years, expectations that felt within reach. 3 months passed in a blur of new routines and cautious hope. Mara's position with the events team became permanent after she successfully coordinated the International Banking Conference without a single complaint from the notoriously demanding attendees. Her salary doubled, then increased again when she took on additional responsibilities for VIP relations. The education program proved more challenging than she'd anticipated. After 15 years away from formal education, sitting in a classroom again felt foreign, intimidating. She'd enrolled in night classes at the City University of New York, pursuing a degree in business administration with a focus on hospitality management. The first few weeks, she'd come home after class and cried from the frustration of feeling behind, of struggling to keep up with concepts that seemed to come easily to younger students. But she persisted, studied during lunch breaks, stayed up late reviewing notes. Gradually, the material began to make sense. Her first exam came back with a B+. Not perfect, but a solid start. Through it all, David remained a steady presence in her life. They were careful at work, professional, distant, nothing more than boss and employee in public. But twice a week, they met for dinner at Tony's restaurant in Brooklyn, away from prying eyes and hotel gossip. They talked about everything and nothing. Books they'd read, places they'd been, dreams they'd had and lost and found again. Slowly, the 15-year gap between them filled with shared stories and new memories. They hadn't kissed, hadn't even held hands. Whatever was growing between them, they were taking it slowly, cautiously, both aware of the complications their history and current positions created. Victoria remained coldly professional toward Mara, neither friendly nor openly hostile. The hotel staff had mostly stopped whispering when Mara entered a room, though she occasionally caught curious glances from those who wondered how a former maid had risen so quickly through the ranks. On a crisp October morning, Mara arrived at work to find her office door ajar. Inside, Victoria was waiting, a folder in her hands and an unreadable expression on her face. "Ms. Keller," Mara said, setting down her bag. "Is everything all right?" "That depends on your definition of all right," Victoria replied. She placed the folder on Mara's desk. "Do you know what this is?" Mara glanced at the folder. "No. It's the security report from the night you were accused of stealing Mrs. Whitmore's bracelet." Mara tensed. "That was resolved months ago. The bracelet was found behind the dresser." "Yes, it was." Victoria opened the folder. "But what's interesting is what the security footage shows happening before that." "I don't understand." Victoria pulled out a series of still images from the security cameras. "These were taken the afternoon of the gala. That's Mrs. Whitmore's suite." She pointed to a figure entering the room. "And that's not you." Mara leaned closer. The image showed someone in a hotel uniform entering the Wellington suite. But it wasn't her. It was another housekeeper, one she recognized from the morning shift. "That's Alicia," Mara said. "She wasn't assigned to that room." "I was." "Exactly." Victoria laid out more images. Alicia Mendez entered the Wellington suite at 2:17 p.m., stayed for approximately 9 minutes, then left. You entered at 3:45 p.m. for the scheduled turn-down service. The bracelet was reported missing at 5:30 p.m. Mara looked up at Victoria, confused. "Why are you showing me this now? Why didn't anyone check this footage 3 months ago?" "Because I only requested the full day's footage yesterday," Victoria admitted. "After certain discrepancies in the inventory reports came to my attention." "What discrepancies?" Victoria's perfect composure slipped slightly. "Items have been disappearing from guest rooms for the past year. Small things at first, a watch here, a pair of earrings there. Things that could be explained away as guests misplacing them. But the pattern has escalated. In the last month alone, we've had 3 significant thefts, all from VIP suites. And you think Alicia is responsible? The evidence suggests it." Victoria closed the folder. "But that's not why I'm here." "Then why are you?" Victoria met Mara's eyes directly. "To apologize." Of all the things Mara had expected Victoria to say, that wasn't one of them. "I'm sorry. I was wrong about you," Victoria said, the words clearly difficult for her. "I accused you publicly without proper investigation. I allowed my personal feelings to cloud my professional judgment." "Personal feelings?" Victoria's perfect eyebrows rose slightly. "Let's not pretend we don't both know what I'm referring to. My relationship with David, Mr. Thomas, is complicated." Mara felt her stomach tighten. "Your relationship?" "Professional relationship," Victoria clarified. "Though there was a time when it might have been more, had circumstances been different." She waved a hand dismissively. "Ancient history now. The point is, I let my personal bias affect how I treated you, and that was unprofessional." Mara didn't know how to respond. Victoria Keller, the ice queen of the Thomas Grand, was apologizing to her, admitting she'd been wrong, hinting at a past with David that Mara hadn't known about. "I appreciate that," Mara said finally. "But why tell me about Alicia? Shouldn't you be taking this to security?" "I already have. She'll be dealt with appropriately." Victoria straightened, regaining her usual composure. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know, and because I'd like to offer you a new position." "A new position?" "Director of Guest Relations," Victoria said, "reporting directly to me. The current director is retiring next month, and you've proven yourself capable with the VIP clients." Mara stared at her. "You want to promote me? After everything?" "I promote based on merit, Miss Thorne. despite what you may think of me. Victoria's lips curved in a small, tight smile. You've done exceptional work these past 3 months. The guest satisfaction scores for the banking conference were the highest we've ever recorded. You have a natural talent for anticipating needs and solving problems before they arise. I don't know what to say. Say you'll consider it, Victoria suggested. The position comes with a significant salary increase and more regular hours, which I understand would be beneficial for your education program. How did you know about that? I make it my business to know everything that happens in this hotel. Victoria stood. Think about it. Let me know by the end of the week. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing, Miss Thorne. Whatever is or isn't happening between you and David, keep it professional within these walls. The Thomas Grand runs on reputation and discretion. Nothing is happening, Mara said automatically. Victoria's expression was knowing. Not yet, perhaps. But we both know it's only a matter of time. She nodded once, briskly. End of the week. My office. After she left, Mara sat at her desk, trying to process everything that had just happened. Victoria's apology, the revelation about Alicia, the job offer, and most unsettling of all, the casual mention of Victoria's history with David. She pulled out her phone to text him, then stopped herself. This wasn't something to discuss over text, and she wasn't even sure what she wanted to say. Congratulations on not firing a thief. By the way, what's your history with Victoria? Did you date her? Sleep with her? Mara put her phone away and turned to her computer. She had work to do, a decision to make, and questions that would have to wait for their next dinner at Tony's. That evening, as Mara was preparing to leave, her phone buzzed with a text from David. Dinner tonight? Have news to share. She replied, Me too. Tony's at 7. Actually, was hoping you might come to my place. Something I want to show you. Mara hesitated. They'd been careful to keep their meetings public, neutral. Going to his home felt like crossing a line they'd silently agreed to respect. Just dinner, came another text, as if he'd sensed her hesitation. I promise to be a gentleman. Mara smiled despite herself. A dress. He sent it, along with instructions for the doorman. An Upper East Side address that probably cost more per month than she made in a year, even with her new salary. See you at 7, she texted back. She went home first to change, discarding 3 outfits before settling on a simple black dress she'd bought with her first paycheck from the events team. Nothing fancy, but a step up from the thrift store clothes she'd worn to their first dinner. David's building was exactly as imposing as she'd expected. A pre-war limestone edifice with a uniformed doorman and marble lobby. The doorman checked her name against a list, then directed her to the private elevator that served only the penthouse. The elevator opened directly into a foyer larger than her entire apartment. Beyond it stretched a living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. The decor was surprisingly understated. Comfortable furniture in neutral tones, bookshelves lining one wall, a few carefully chosen pieces of art. Mara. David appeared from what she assumed was the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, his feet bare. You found it okay? Hard to miss a building like this, she said, trying not to stare at the view. He smiled. It's a bit much, I know, but the view sold me. He gestured toward the windows. Go ahead. Everyone does it their first time here. Mara walked to the windows, gazing out at the park spread below like a green carpet in the midst of the concrete city. The autumn leaves were turning, creating a patchwork of red and gold against the remaining green. It's beautiful, she admitted. Worth every penny of the ridiculous mortgage, David said, coming to stand beside her. Though I own it outright now. Of course you do, Mara said, but there was no bitterness in her tone. Just acknowledgement of the vast difference in their circumstances. I made dinner, David said, changing the subject. Nothing fancy, just pasta. I'm not much of a cook. You cook. Mara couldn't hide her surprise. Don't sound so shocked, he laughed. I lived alone through college and most of my 20s. Had to learn the basics or starve. He led her to a dining area adjacent to the kitchen. The table was set for two, with candles and a bottle of wine already open to breathe. "This looks lovely," Mara said, genuinely touched by the effort. "I wanted tonight to be special," David explained, pulling out a chair for her. "We have things to celebrate." "We do. Your promotion, for one." He poured wine into her glass. "Victoria told me she offered you the director position." "She did. This afternoon." Mara took a sip of wine. "She also showed me security footage proving I didn't steal that bracelet." David's expression darkened. "I know. I saw the report this morning. Alicia Mendez has been stealing from guests for months. She was fired and escorted from the property an hour ago." "Victoria apologized to me," Mara said, still somewhat disbelieving. "Actually said the words, 'I was wrong.'" "That might be a first," David admitted. "Victoria doesn't admit mistakes easily." "She also mentioned that you two have a complicated history." David paused in the act of serving pasta onto their plates. "She did. Did she? Care to elaborate?" He finished serving, then sat across from her. "Victoria and I dated briefly about 5 years ago, before she became hotel manager. It didn't work out." "Why not?" "Many reasons. We wanted different things. The timing was wrong." He met her eyes. "And if I'm being completely honest, she wasn't you." Mara nearly choked on her wine. "What?" "I dated other women over the years," David explained. "Some relationships lasted longer than others, but none of them ever quite measured up to the memory of a girl I knew for 3 weeks in high school." "That's pathetic? Romantic? A little of both." He smiled ruefully. "I know how it sounds, but it's the truth. You made an impression on me, Marion Thornton. One that lasted 15 years. Mara didn't know how to respond to that. The idea that she had been a standard against which he measured other women was both flattering and terrifying. "You said you had news to share," she said, changing the subject. "Besides my promotion." "I do." David's expression brightened. "The Thomas Foundation is launching a new scholarship program. Full ride for students who've had to leave school due to family medical crises." "That's wonderful," Mara said sincerely. "It's called the Thornton Scholarship," David continued, "in honor of a student who had to abandon her education to care for an ill parent." Mara set down her fork. "You named it after me?" "After your mother, actually," David corrected gently. "And all the parents whose illnesses forced their children to choose between education and family." Tears pricked at Mara's eyes. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know." David reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "The first recipients will be selected next fall. 5 students who've had to leave school to care for family members. Full tuition, books, living expenses, everything covered." That's incredible, David. "It's what should have existed 15 years ago," he said. "For you. For others like you." Mara turned her hand over, lacing her fingers with his. It was the first time they'd held hands, the first deliberate touch they'd shared since reconnecting. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for the scholarship. For everything. These past 3 months. You've changed my life." "You changed your life," David corrected. "I just opened a few doors. You walked through them on your own." They ate in companionable silence for a while. The pasta simple but delicious, the wine rich and complex. Mara found herself relaxing, the tension of the day's revelations easing in the warmth of David's home and company. "There's something else I wanted to show you," David said as they finished eating. "The real reason I asked you here tonight." "Oh," Mara raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" "Not at all." He stood, offering his hand. "Come with me." He led her down a hallway to a door at the end. "Close your eyes," he requested. "David, humor me, please." Mara sighed but closed her eyes. She heard the door open, felt David's hand on the small of her back guiding her forward. "Okay," he said. "Open them." Mara opened her eyes to find herself in a home office. One wall was entirely windows, offering the same spectacular view as the living room. Another wall was covered in bookshelves, but it was the third wall that drew her attention. It was a gallery of framed photographs, dozens of them arranged in a timeline, and every single one featured young people in graduation caps and gowns, holding diplomas, beaming at the camera. "What is this?" Mara asked, moving closer. "Every Thomas Foundation Scholarship recipient who's graduated," David explained. 15 years worth. 173 students who might not have made it through college without help. Mara studied the photos, taking in the diverse faces, the proud smiles, the sense of accomplishment radiating from each image. "This is amazing," she said. "All these lives changed. One scholarship can transform a family for generations," David said, standing beside her. "Break cycles of poverty, open doors that seemed permanently closed. Like it did for you." "Exactly." He pointed to a space on the wall where several empty frames hung. "Those are for the Thornton Scholarship recipients. The first class will graduate in about 5 years." Mara felt overwhelmed. The scholarship, the promotion, the wall of success stories. It was all so much more than she'd ever imagined possible 3 months ago. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. "Because I want you to understand what drives me," David said simply. "This," he gestured to the wall, "is my real legacy. Not the hotels, not the real estate, these lives, these opportunities." He turned to face her fully. "And because I want you to be part of it. Not just as the inspiration for the Thornton Scholarship, but as an active participant in the foundation. Someone who understands firsthand what these students are facing." "You want me to work for the foundation?" "Eventually, when you're ready, after you finish your degree." He took both her hands in his. "But more than that, I want you in my life, Mara. Not just as a colleague or a friend or a dinner companion twice a week. Mara didn't let him finish. She rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his, a kiss 15 years in the making. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer, and for a moment, the past and present merged into something new and hopeful. When they finally broke apart, David rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I recognized you in my office." "What took you so long?" Mara asked, smiling. "I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid you'd think I was using my position, my power. Afraid you weren't ready." "I wasn't," Mara acknowledged. "Not then. But I am now." They stood together, surrounded by the faces of lives transformed, much like their own. Two people who had lost each other and found their way back, changed by time and circumstance but still connected by something neither could fully explain. 1 year later, Mara stood at the podium in the Thomas Grand Ballroom, addressing the first class of Thornton Scholarship recipients. She wore a simple blue dress and 2 rings on a chain around her neck. One old, one new, both precious beyond their monetary value. "Life doesn't always go as planned," she told the 5 students seated before her, their families watching proudly. "Sometimes it takes everything from you. Your home, your education, your loved ones. But what I've learned, what I hope you'll learn, is that your worth isn't determined by what you lose, but by how you rebuild." In the back of the room, David watched, his eyes never leaving her face. Victoria stood beside him, their professional relationship now built on mutual respect rather than complicated history. "The ring that cost me my job turned out to be the key to finding my way back," Mara continued. "Not because it was valuable, it was worth maybe $2, but because it connected me to who I used to be and who I could become again." She touched the rings at her throat, a gesture that had become habit. Sometimes the things we think are endings are really just beginnings in disguise. Sometimes what looks like a loss is actually the universe's way of redirecting us toward what we were always meant to find. After the ceremony, as the students and their families mingled over champagne and hors d'oeuvres, David joined Mara by the windows overlooking the city. "Director Thorne," he said, handing her a glass of champagne. "That was quite a speech." "Thank you, Mr. Thomas," she replied with a smile. "I had good material to work with." They clinked glasses, their wedding rings catching the light. They'd married 6 months earlier in a small ceremony at Tony's restaurant, with Mrs. Patel and Victoria as witnesses and Tony himself catering the reception. "Did I ever tell you?" David said, his voice low for her ears only, "that the moment I saw you take that ring on the security footage, something in me recognized you before my brain even processed who you were?" "You might have mentioned it once or twice," Mara teased. "It's true. Something in me knew." He touched the rings hanging around her neck. "Just like something in you knew to keep this all those years." Mara looked out at the ballroom where she'd once been humiliated, now filled with scholarship recipients whose lives would be transformed just as hers had been. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from invisible maid to director, from surviving to thriving, from lost to found. "Some things," she said, echoing words she'd thought to herself that night a year ago, "come full circle if you wait long enough." David's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. "And some circles," he added, "are worth waiting 15 years to complete." As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Mara stood once more in the empty ballroom. She remembered standing in the same spot 3 years earlier, invisible in her maid's uniform, picking up discarded glasses and napkins. Now she wore a designer dress and a director's confidence, but more importantly, she carried within her the knowledge that her worth had never been determined by either. She touched the 2 rings one last time, the original that had kept her connected to her past, and the duplicate that had led her back to her future. $2 that had cost her a job but given her back a life. 2 small circles of metal that had completed the largest circle of all, the journey back to herself. Outside, David waited with the car that would take them home. Not to her tiny apartment with its leaking faucet, but to their brownstone in Brooklyn where bookshelves lined the walls and her diploma, freshly earned with honors, hung proudly in the study they shared. "Ready?" he asked as she joined him. Mara took his hand, feeling the weight of both their journeys in that simple touch. "I've been ready for 15 years, she said. "I just didn't know it until now." And as they drove away from the hotel that had been both her prison and her salvation, Mara thought about all the twists and turns that had led her here. The mother she'd lost, the education she'd abandoned, the poverty she'd endured, the ring she'd kept, the duplicate she'd taken, the man she'd found again. None of it had been easy. None of it had been fair. But all of it had been necessary to bring her to this moment, this life, this love. Some things, it seemed, were worth losing everything to find.